2022 was an interesting year, and the first year I've really put in a lot of effort outside of my main mahi to consume as much media as I possibly could. And because this channel's obviously a hobby, some things have had to slip through the cracks, but this video's still been a passion project of mine for a while. If I can only do one video a year for the rest of my life, I hope it's one like this. That's if this one turns out to be any good, it might be f***ing shit. I watched, I think, the most films I've ever watched last year. Played a hell of a lot of games, listened to a lot of tunes. I even tried reading some books, but I've become a bit slow lately, so I only got through a handful. While COVID's kinda normal these days, its effects are still very present. The film industry is still trying to recover from that. People only want what's safe. Marvel and Disney as a whole has really run with that ball, even if it's meant a lot of their stuff has just continued to slip further into mediocrity. And Avatar: The Way of Water has also shown that people really only want to watch what they're familiar with. It's getting better, but it's taking its time. While toxic criticisms for media still exist, I mean hell, look at the hate still levied towards the Star Wars sequels, I believe there's also such thing as toxic positivity. A blindness towards flaws. Rose-coloured glasses, you know, that sort of thing. Comic book fans sure have boxes full of those. In order for our art to get better, we need to be able to discuss the good with the bad. Otherwise, things will never improve. How do we learn? This video is my attempt to summarise all the media that I consumed this year. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Some things I've checked out might not even garner a mention here, but I'll do my best to include everything in some capacity. Alright, enough of all that nonsense, shall we just jump into it then? Karafiua. Now, I may not look it, but I'm not a composer, nor did I ever study music, but gosh do I love a good score. There was some excellent stuff this year. We Own This City, The White Lotus, and Book of Boba Fett take the cake for my favourite themes of 2022. All three inject their own uniqueness that fits so well with the different tones of the respective shows. Stranger Things score continues to carry that entire show, and Ramin Djawadi brings over his triumphs from Game of Thrones to make House of the Dragon just as memorable. Although, I'm still quite pissed off we didn't get a new theme. Prehistoric Planet's score elevates what was already such a great show, and reminds me of the good old days. Whatever those old days were. While Euphoria Season 2 soundtrack probably wasn't as good as the first, I still really love its fusion of choral tones and electronic beats. In cinema, Michael Giacchino he just excels at everything he does. And Howard Shore created a fittingly weird score for Crimes of the Future. Marcel the Shell with Shoes On would have made my top 10 scores, if not for another one of Disaster Pieces' masterpieces. Alexander Desplat's score for Del Toro's Pinocchio reminds me of why I fell in love with score in the first place. And if 3000 Years of Longing didn't reach the heights I wanted it to, Junkie XL's score certainly did. There was some great stuff for video games this year too. Well, the game technically came out in 2021. When Chernobyl Light's score dropped, I couldn't take that thing off repeat. As well as being an excellent game, Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope has an excellent score from some absolute legends. And Trek to Yomi's score perfectly enhances its presentation. Here are my top scores of 2022. Well, there was some damn good stuff this year, I'll say that much. Where do I even start? I think action films saw a bit of a comeback this year. Not that they've particularly gone anywhere, but I feel like non-comic book action films have broken through the line a bit. Bullet Train and Ambulance provided some incredibly stimulating fun, with decent action, memorable characters, and a distinct style that provided some of the most fun I've had in a cinema all year. The Woman King I don't think would have been possible without the success of Black Panther, but after watching this, I'm excited to see the future of these kinds of films. I suppose I have to talk about Top Gun too, and I mean, it might be one of the best legacy sequels we've had, really. Clean is probably the best word I'd use to describe this, if maybe a tad long. Maybe not long enough. As far as other cinema goes, The Duke provided some whimsically cute and innocent drama that really just makes you feel good. Operation Mincemeat views a lot better than it sounds, and Nope, while not his strongest, still continues rolling Peele's ball, and I will continue to watch everything he makes. Still haven't seen Get Out though. But what about the superheroes? Is it weird that the best one was Sonic? Well, that movie was also way too long. It was a hell of a lot of fun. One of the few things I enjoyed from Marvel was the Werewolf by Night special. Something actually refreshing from them for once. The Batman definitely moved away from action to prioritise drama, tone, and that slow plodding investigative story, even if it didn't end up being super deep. A solid foundation, but I can't help but feel like I want a more campy Batman, especially because this film still didn't reach the heights of The Dark Knight. Like the year before it, animation in 2022 continues to push its way into the mainstream consciousness. And by that, I just mean more respect for animation that lends itself to more mature stories. Other than your cut and paste docos, I feel like this might be one of the reasons Netflix is maybe still worth it today. Intergalactic is Spider-Verse with a solid romance and some great style, both visual and in its music. Turning Red was a sweet story about adolescence and growing up that I think everyone can appreciate, and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers brings a silly self-awareness you can't help but be entertained by. Speaking of entertainment, Jackass Forever brought everything we loved about these insane human beings back for another outing. Television saw some real phenomenons this year. While I find some of the Sandman structural pacing between episodes to be a little wonky, I was pleasantly surprised with how it all turned out, and had some of my favourite episodes from a show this year. Plenty of solid thrillers that may or may not bloom into something more. The Old Man and Reacher giving everything they need to. Some great drama too. While The Crown's later season was fairly slower than the rest of the show, I'm still enjoying every moment of it. The Staircase is a solid whodunit that just reminds me how much I bloody love Colin Firth. The best comic book thing I saw in 2022 was the last thing I would have expected. Peacemaker. Of all the characters from James Gunn's The Suicide Squad to spin-off, why John Cena? Well, now I know. Introspective, funny and weird, in only the way a C-tier comic book story could be. And one hell of an intro. One of my favourites was the spiritual successor to The Wire, with We Own This City, except this time breaking down many of the actual things that inspired that show. It's great to see some of the cast from that show jump into this too. Our Flag Means Death puts Taika and Reese in some of the most hilariously wholesome shenanigans I've ever seen them in. Even She-Hulk, once you move past the weird soy boy incels, was pretty fitting for the character, and I'd argue the Daredevil we got there was just as fitting with the character in the Netflix show. And with Netflix in mind, Cyberpunk Edge Runners did what Arcane did for League of Legends, with a game that I'm still not sure is any good yet. Andor was a surprise hit after Star Wars and Disney in general have been nothing but letdowns. I think the show stretches itself a little thin, but overall a great use of the Star Wars IP to tell a grounded and meaty story. And I can't talk about shows and not mention Prehistoric Planet. While I'll miss Kenneth Branagh, Sir David is more than we could ask for. I hope we get more of the splendour, because everything about it's just stunning. Then there is The Rehearsal. I don't know how to describe the experience one feels when watching this, or even what its point is. I didn't laugh anywhere near as much as I thought I would, and yet I'm just perpetually intrigued. All it asks is questions, and makes me reconsider everything as each episode goes on. Finally, 2022 was also a great year for video games. Plenty of big blockbusters, but as usual, I feel like it's the smaller, more overlooked titles that deserve the praise. To start with, there were quite a few notable relaxing games that really took things running, such as Power Wash Simulator and Dorfromantik. Excruciatingly simple, but incredibly effective at passing the time and cooling the mood. Some great action games. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Shredder's Revenge fueled the nostalgia by bringing back the arcade beat 'em up to a console. Even though I got no friends, so I had to play this one by myself. Vampire Survivors had an incredibly addictive gameplay loop, even if all you're doing is running around and not pushing any other buttons. High on Life, which is a mixed bag based on your personal feelings towards how funny Justin Roiland is, of that and the meta humour that would give Deadpool a run for its money. Writing and style were this year's strong suits, with more slow plodding games. Penitent, with its unique style and depth of history, it sure takes its time, and is either a love it or hate it experience. A Memoir Blue, with its great presentation, a short dive into a beautiful story with plenty of emotion. Lost in Play, an incredibly accessible adventure that moves from one moment to the other like you're watching a Saturday morning cartoon. Then there is Immortality, a somewhat pretentious but really creative story that has players capable of solving the story however they choose. There's a quiet thrill to this game, and an eeriness that I can't put my finger on. Oh, and also this game is horny as hell. Finally, Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, expanded on the original experience in ways I could never have predicted. If you've never played it, just pick up this one. A game best to go in blind, and an experience you can't replicate. If you were interested in High on Life because of its creative meta humour, this game takes that to the extreme. I'd start here. I love a good rave like the rest of them, and 2022 turned out some absolute bangers to rock out to. Retro and synthwave continue to be some of my favourite stuff to listen to. Pilot keeps releasing absolute gems along with the diary entries that really draw you into the world of the music. This year also saw the return of absolute legend Kavinsky after being AWOL for almost a decade. Domball crept up on me this year too, with some of the best stuff I think I've heard from him. On the more dancey side of things, Noisia created one hell of a send-off for the trio. They will be missed. Caseta went really hard this year, and Excision's subsidiary albums continue to spotlight some really great smaller talent. Sophie Tucker and Rez keep their respective tunes going hard, and I don't want either of them to change what they're doing. Flume's tracks continue to inspire me, and his off-key sounds continue to make every song he makes so unique. What's So Not had a great year too, releasing some absolute tunes in his first album since 2018. Troy Boy keeps his things going with some really short but really danceable tunes. Andrew Huang continues to be the funky little experimenter that he is, and his album Dustin Dewdrops has been one of my favourites to put on in the background. M-Cube's Workshop 1300 has that similar quirky mundaneness that really helps fill that void. I'm going to be a bit different here from the scores and recommend 10 tracks rather than 10 albums, as, hell, most artists just release singles half the time anyway. Here are 10 tracks I couldn't take my ears. Let's go with that. Here are 10 tracks I couldn't take my ears off of.
Me out of We enter the night and the lights, I admit that I felt it. Caught in and divided, since my perception is not true.
Something for me. 21. Can you hit a little rich flex for me? 21. Then 21. Can you?
While this channel generally skews more negative than it does positive, I do enjoy talking about good things more than bad. I just find negative criticisms good ways to learn and improve the craft of storytelling. But alas, there were plenty of bad things this year. Honestly, we may as well jump straight back into Netflix, who keep churning out such mediocrity, I don't know why I still use it. From 2022's new generic Kevin Hart film in The Man from Toronto, to an attempt at meta-comedy that continually trips over itself in The Bubble, Netflix clearly has its priorities straight with quantity over quality. Fantastic Beasts and Jurassic World both ended with very pathetic attempts at the third film in their respective trilogies. I think both franchises need to die, and I hope they stay that way. Uncharted was kind of exactly what we expected it to be. I wouldn't even call it bad per se, it just didn't do anything. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, as well as being a mouthful to say, is everything I hate about the MCU right now. An empty plot, wasted character development, and the inclusion of characters that don't service the movie they're in, but a weird meta-ness that aims to hold audiences to the screen until the next movie. Television had some bizarre releases this year too, and some real letdowns. DMZ was a few hours of wasted potential. I don't know if the idea is bad or if the show just needed to be a movie, but what stuck with me was the strange choice of heightened colour grading everything had. Bel Air was a weird attempt to take the original show super seriously, which did it no favours. The second season... There's a second season, gosh. I'm gonna be honest. Because of the such low expectations I had for Resident Evil, I ended up enjoying it way more than I probably should have. But alas, no more. We'll see how long it takes until a new reboot happens. And then we finally get to Rings of Power. I wanted to like this. I really did. The production was astounding, the score was excellent, even the cast I had no issue with. The writing just made the show so boring. I really don't have anything else to say about it. It wasn't laughably bad, it was just so boring. We sure had plenty of letdowns in gaming this year too. Saints Row attempted a comeback and then we never heard from them again. The superhero genre certainly didn't fare well either, with Midnight Suns and Gotham Knights fizzling out to almost nothing. A shame, really. If you're wanting to find some really bad games, just have a look over at the free-to-play games. Multiverses is exactly what it's trying to be, but feels so plastic, if that makes sense. And Overwatch 2 is literally the first game but free to play now, so do what you will about that information. While I've categorized this section as normie, it's really just an excuse to shove everything else together that I listened to this year. People get really particular with their music and what is good or bad. But I suppose that's fair because I do that with literally everything else. Kind of the point of this whole channel actually. I enjoyed listening to The Who's This Is Mongol so much, and I was so excited to see them live in 2022. Sticky Fingers aren't normally my vibe, but I really got into some of their tunes this year from Sidelines. While I'm not a rap connoisseur by any means, Jid had a great album this year, and I enjoyed Kendrick's stuff this year too, and Jack Harlow and the whole lot of them. That speaks to how much I know about rap. The Black Eyed Peas are apparently still around too, and Elevation was pretty fun. I immediately went on my party playlist. I tried to be rather experimental this year, and listen to a bunch of things I wouldn't normally. While a lot of Florence and the Machine's album this year sounded quite samey to me, there were a few tracks there that I really dug. Oh, and I'm not gonna listen to Taylor Swift, so for those that know me. Both Drake and Beyonce attempted house, and I hate to say it, but I didn't really like either of those albums. House has always been a big part of my music taste, and it's gone quite mainstream the past few years, which isn't a bad thing. But some of the fans can be bloody insufferable. Fred again, fans, I'm looking at you. Anyways, enough about that. Here's some of my favourite music that don't fit in either of the other categories.
Nothing to discuss, cause I did win by default and without any doubt. I'm a me happy adult, I no go feed the sexy, handsome, classy, don't nothing faze me when I feel like smooth, sexy, handsome. Full of loving, yo, whoa, whoa. Nobody better for the dancer, no. Fine lady, she dey bounce along.
Now, this is just a section for me to talk about everything else, because nothing is perfect. Some of these are practically on my good list, some on the bad, but all of these things have some weird quirks that either keep them short of being amazing, or are so dull I can barely remember anything about them. Honestly, this is probably the section I looked forward to doing the most. 2022's Scream certainly was the most legacy sequel a legacy sequel has ever been, and makes me wonder whether we need these kinds of movies at all, even if I did really enjoy my time with it. The unbearable weight of massive talent has an air of self-awareness, but ends up just being a pretty simple, yet surprisingly wholesome story. As far as action films go, The Grey Man is certainly one of them. Chris Evans was the standout, but I felt like he wasn't utilised enough. Prey was a refreshing take on the Predator franchise, but I felt the actual plot and character arcs were incredibly generic and predictable. I can't help but admire Black Adam's attempt to say something about the US involvement in foreign countries, and then nothing else about it. I have a whole video on Wakanda Forever, so if you're wondering why it's on this list, go watch that video first. Death on the Nile and See How They Run were both decently executed run-of-the-mill whodunits that I forgot about rather easily. Glass Onion, while not as strong and well-rounded as Knives Out, still was incredibly entertaining to watch, and I'm excited to keep watching Benoit Blanc's misadventures. 3,000 Years of Longing had a very tight and entertaining second act, but the end of the movie goes on for way too long, and I wonder if this movie is a short film dragged out too thin. The Fabelmans is clearly a passion project, but I couldn't help but feel like the movie underwhelmed me in almost every way. It was awesome to see Dame Fiona Cooper's story told on the big screen, but you can tell white people made it because of the things the film chose to focus on. Of all the Netflix films I saw this year, I was not expecting Hustle to be one of the ones I enjoyed the most, and Crimes of the Future was one of the weirdest movies I've ever seen, and I loved every second of it. Barbarian had one of the most intense first hours of a film I've seen in a long time. If the rest of the movie had run with that, it would have easily made my top 10 films of 2022. Unfortunately, the second half just ended up feeling a lot like other films in its genre. This year on TV, I feel like we had a lot of sequel seasons that just really underwhelmed me. Euphoria is still a good show, but its second outing feels more like what some of the empty-headed fans think the show is, rather than the depth that the first had. Stranger Things Season 4, The Boys Season 3, Umbrella Academy Season 3, and Rick and Morty Season 6 all succeeded where their predecessors failed, yet still couldn't reach the heights of their earlier runs. The Boys just kind of isn't going anywhere for me, and I hope that changes in the next season. Where Andor picked up what Star Wars dropped and turned it into something special, Obi-Wan kind of did the opposite. It had its moments, but overall I think served no purpose in the larger narrative. With Disney on the brain, Moon Knight was decent? Again, this should have just been a bloody movie. Could probably say the same about Miss Marvel, to be honest. Murderville was a cool idea I'd like to see more of, and it could just be my personal sense of humour, but it just never made me laugh very often. Then we have the Halo show, which isn't as bad as all the so-called fans would have you believe, but it also isn't particularly good. The show did the thing I hoped it would, in using its unique medium to break down concepts the games just couldn't, like the Spartans' morality, the purposes of Cortana, and the overall shades of grey of the UNSC. It's just a shame the writing dragged the whole thing down. Speaking of Halo, Halo Infinite's still a game that exists. Content has finally trickled out for it, but might be a bit little too late. Too many of us have fallen off the wagon, even if the base game was one of my favourites of 2021. There's a lot of fine games that I don't want to shit on, but I also don't have a lot of praise for them. They just kind of do the things that they do. And there's certainly a big place for those kinds of games. A game I still have mixed feelings towards is Trek to Yomi. As far as presentation goes, it might be my favourite game of the year. It also has music and a story to match, but the gameplay gets really stale. And even though it's not super long, I think the game drags itself out too much. Seems to be the case with a lot of things in 2022 actually. Agree with everything I've said? Or am I just kinda talking out of my ass? If it seems like there's quite a few things I've actually missed out, there's a reason for that. This is actually part 1 of 2 videos that was supposed to be a massive single project that got a little bit beyond my scope. So if you're confused why Everything Everywhere All at Once isn't in this video, that'll be why. That video covers my favourite things of 2022. If you'd like to watch that, and I do urge you to if you found anything I've said here remotely interesting, you can find that right here. See you soon.